Hi, I'm Dr Selena Fisk, and welcome to this episode of Make Data Talk. In this podcast, I help you turn your spreadsheets into stories in a way that is practical, accessible, and hopefully a whole lot more useful than your grade 9 maths textbook. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about AI, but specifically about how it can help us before we start doing any of the work around thinking what do we actually see in the data and then what actions do we take as a result of it. There's heaps of potential, particularly for generative AI, to help us in this work going forward. We just need to know what to ask for and what's possible. AI is such a broad term, and trying to define it is a bit of a mission in itself. AI has existed in our lives for, decades. It's not just a year or two old. Generative AI and ChatGPT might be relatively new to us, but forms of AI and I guess the initial versions of it have existed for a really long time. I think about Mr. Clippy in Microsoft Word years ago when you used to start writing a letter, and if you started writing "Dear Sir" or "Madam," and Mr. Clippy would come up in the bottom right-hand corner and say, "It looks like you're writing a letter. Would you like some help with that?" That was a very kind of introductory example of AI. And it's, obviously it has evolved significantly since then. Even 5 to 10 years ago, our phones were kind of starting to anticipate where we were going at a particular time of day and working out the quickest route to get there. And there's just so much. I guess there's a huge existence of AI in our world. This is not just the last year or two. It's obviously been evolving over decades. One of the questions I'm asked a lot about, and I actually presented a keynote on this last week, but it's about the use of AI and data storytelling. And right up front, I need to say that, data storytelling will never be able to be replaced by AI or generative AI or machine learning. We will always need the human element and the human aspect that comes with data storytelling, because ultimately it is people and it's the human stories that really are what motivate others to change and to think about what's possible. But AI and generative AI absolutely has a really key role to play in, I guess, the analysis that we do to begin with. And in many ways, it actually can be far superior to the human brain and human analysis. It's definitely a lot faster and a lot quicker. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Noise, he talks about the amount of noise that exists in human decision-making, and he gives some examples of noisy decisions in professions that maybe we wouldn't actually expect for people that, we think would be pretty consistent in their decision-making. Examples that he refers to are judges who are potentially more lenient in the afternoon, doctors who are more likely to prescribe medications after lunchtime, rather than sometimes they can be, more inquisitive in the morning and more curious and take a bit more time. And these are professions where we would assume that you're getting the same service and the same experience regardless of the time of day. But what he highlights is that even when we're, attempting to be unbiased, there is still going to be noise and variability in our decision-making. And that absolutely comes into play when we're looking at data and we're analysing it and we're thinking about, what we would like to know from the data, what questions we have, and how we would like to best represent that. Now, we also make mistakes. Beyond noise, we also make mistakes. And what we know is that the more we can automate the data processes that we have, particularly when we're dealing with huge data sets, then the less likely we are to have mistakes in the data that we're looking at. And we need accurate and valid and reliable data because we don't want rubbish coming in, because we know that there will be rubbish going out. But what Daniel Kahneman says in his book Noise, towards the end, he says that he sees while AI and generative AI is inherently biased because it is based on humans and the massive amounts of data that we're generating, it is less noisy. Using AI and technology to do some of this work is less noisy than human decision making. Also, it saves us a huge amount of time. We can automate a lot of these processes. So I'm going to share with you a couple of ways that generative AI can help us with the analysis of data and the pre-work that we need to do before we start actually analysing it and thinking about the actions. But obviously, I do need to say that, I'm recording this in 2024. Things are obviously going to change pretty quickly in this space. So this is, I guess, what is most well known at this point in time. And equally, any of the online tools, it's just really important that we do checks around security. We look at what our organizational rules are around inputting data and using some of these online platforms, because we obviously, there's a lot of private information that we have access to. So we certainly wouldn't want to be uploading identifiable data into any one of these generative AI models. But the first way that I see AI helping us in, I guess, learning about data to begin with is around data literacy. So rather than, trawling through loads of different YouTube videos, searching online PDFs for maybe different platforms and looking at kind of frequently asked questions on different websites, and I guess trying to find information about the types of data or the technology that we use, AI has the ability to answer questions pretty quickly for us about our fundamental data literacy. So we have to understand the data to begin with. I've talked about that in a previous podcast episode. And a ChatGPT, for example, has an extraordinary ability to make sense of that for us. And even if something is explained to us in a way that maybe we don't necessarily understand, one of my favorite things to do in a ChatGPT or equivalent is to ask it to simplify the explanation, or simplify the explanation, say, for a 15-year-old. And you can change the complexity of the information that you're getting. You can change the level of detail that you're getting. You can also make it more complex and more detailed if you want to. But it's a pretty amazing one-stop shop for building our data literacy, so that we actually know what the metrics are, what they mean. Because if we don't know that, we're potentially going to overlook them and not use them when they could be really useful for us. We can also use generative AI platforms to help us with data cleaning. So this is not available on all of them, but where we have duplicates of data, we have holes in our data, we can actually upload spreadsheets. Again, a bit of a caveat around obviously privacy and being really aware of what you do upload. But we can use some of these programs to actually clean the data for us, so we don't have the duplicates. And what that means is that when we go to the analysis, we're not going to be distracted by the noise or the duplicates or the errors or the holes in the information, because it's going to be a lot cleaner for us. So there's a lot less noise in the data set itself, which is obviously just going to help this entire process. Again, that is going to be so much faster with the right tools. That's so much faster when it's being done by a generative AI model, as opposed to a human going through that process and trying to clean the data themselves. That takes a whole lot of time. We obviously are prone to error. We would need to be checking everything. It is far superior to be using an AI model to be able to clean that data for us. One of the other things that I really like to use generative AI for is actually to help me with spreadsheeting problems. So I had an example of this actually the other day, where I kind of use Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel, depending on basically who my client or what my client uses. But I was attempting to do a VLOOKUP, which I do all the time in Google Sheets, but I was trying to do a VLOOKUP from data that existed in a different Google Sheet. And I had followed all the instructions that I found online, and I had imported the link to the other Google Sheet, and I thought I had done it right. But it was coming up as an error, and it was coming up as a parse error. And I didn't know what that meant. And so I thought, okay, it was actually from a prompt from Kenny, from somebody who's in my team of presenters. And he said, you can use ChatGPT for that. And so I copied the formula that I had typed into Google Sheets. I went over to ChatGPT and I said, this is coming up as a parse error. Please help me fix it. And I dropped in the formula that I'd typed, and it responded immediately with the exact formula that was working for me, and I could pick it up and drop it in my Excel spreadsheet, and it worked straight away. Really extraordinary. It would have taken me a lot longer to have troubleshooted that problem myself. It was a really minor error that I would have missed, and I would have tried a whole lot of other things before I actually found the thing that was wrong with it. You can obviously ask ChatGPT to explain what the problem was as well. It just cut down a whole lot of time. And it meant that then, because I could get the spreadsheet working as it needed to, and I could draw in this data from the other sheet, that we could start to do the analysis and engage in those conversations more quickly. So it meant that we had really valuable time talking about what we could see and what the trends and insights were and what the possible actions were. We weren't just spending heaps of time on this hamster wheel trying to fix this formula. The final bit I think that AI can really help us with is the data visualization piece to, I guess, present the data in a way that's going to answer the questions that we have about the information. Within Microsoft Excel, we know for years there has been recommended charts, and that's a version of AI where if you have a table of data, you could go to recommended charts and it would come up with some suggestions. And that capacity and those suggestions in the data analytics tab in recent years has improved quite significantly. But the other thing we can do, if we do have spreadsheets that we're able to upload into, say, a ChatGPT equivalent, and there's plenty of other platforms that potentially do the analysis of this better than ChatGPT itself, but we can actually get it to produce the visualizations for us. So we can say, I'm trying to see this particular thing, create a bar chart that demonstrates this. I was doing this the other day with two different sets of data, actually, and I wanted to have side-by-side bar charts to show that there was a big tail in one set of data compared to the other. And the problem that I encountered, I asked ChatGPT to produce these two graphs separately for me. The problem that I found was that ChatGPT then used incorrect x-axis values, not incorrect, but different x-axis values. So it wasn't actually the perfect comparison because they were both going up in 50s, multiples of 50, but they were starting in different places. So one was like starting at 0 and then 50 and then 100. And then the other one was starting on the 25 and then 75, etc. But again, I was able to just go back once I got the second one and I was able to say, adjust the axis in the previous visual to match the first one. And it was able to, again, within, a handful of seconds, produce this second bar chart that then became comparable. And, I could have done that in Excel. I could have done it myself. It would have probably been pretty fast. It was a pretty simple example of how it can work for us, but a pretty extraordinary example as well, particularly when we've got multiple sets of information and maybe when we're just playing around wanting to look for insights or wanting to know what there is to see. It's really good at doing that for us. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Make Data Talk. As I said, this episode today was about how AI and generative AI can help us prior to actually engaging with the data itself. So some of that setup, some of the preparation, the cleaning, the organization of the data, helping us out with Excel and Google Sheets formulas, and being able to visualize some of that information as well. There's some real power in being able to use these tools that are far superior to us as humans in terms of the noise in the decision making. And they save us a whole lot of time. So stay safe and look after yourself.